The book, Geopolitics in the Era of Globalization, published by Routledge, is already available in its US, Europe, South Asia, and ebook editions. The flyer provides relevant information. Based on a non Western perspective on geopolitics by a former Indian diplomat who served in several key capitals, this book has been endorsed by several distinguished domain experts in diplomacy, strategic analysis, IR theory, and geopolitics, and modern Indian history. This book charts the evolution of post Cold War geopolitics, the theoretical writings about the envisaged global order, the multilateral institutional trends, and the power transitions for a perspective on the prevailing geopolitical fluidity and critical challenges for the humanity at large. Apart from the deepening visceral distrust amongst leaders, there is a certain alarm about the ineffectiveness of global institutions to address these challenges which are beyond national capacities. The world leaders are in a self survival mode, which makes them risk averse and at the same time prone to push coercively whatever immediate advantage becomes apparent. The global order being weakened by this dynamic, space is opened up for the disruptors, adding yet another complex dimension to any crisis situation. Thus, the globalization phenomenon, propelled by accelerating pace of technology, is experiencing a pushback in the form of deglobalization sentiment amongst countries and publics, which still remain the former's primary drivers. There is a broader discourse about the liberal global order having lost its self-validating appeal. The Cold War too between US and Russia and China and US is resulting in live frontiers between their respective armed forces. The wide geographical swathes of instability, of failed or failing states with concomitant interlacing of jihadist terrorism confounds any prospect of a stable global order for meeting our common challenges. The inadequacy of the traditional forms of power and fragmenting identities impacting on societal and institutional cohesiveness reinforce a continuum from the domestic to the international of the elemental forces upending the global order. The global megatrends in the form of youth bulge and unregulated urbanization, forced international and internal migrations, disruptive technologies catalyzing international competition, and loss of state control over the individual, hybrid warfare, climate change, uncontrolled strategic weapons race, and conflation of the conventional and strategic weapons systems present a sobering challenge to the international community, even as it grapples with increasing dysfunctionality of global institutions, which are becoming by themselves challenge multipliers. With so many moving parts, the consequences of a black swan event remain veritably unfathomable. For a growing power with an expanding international role, India lives in a difficult neighborhood affected by these drivers of geopolitical change. The US National Intelligence Council, in its 2012 projections of global trends up to 2030, sums up the methodological conundrums for strategic analysts today. These relate to outcomes concerning US role in the international system, in the situation of its decline or a decisive reassertion, in terms of response of the other powers. The complexity of the dynamics of governance and exploration relationships among diverse set of actors, especially state versus non-state, is another. The rate of change in the rise and decline of different states tends to be underestimated. Exploration of the framework between trends, discontinuities, and crises is yet another. So also is identification of looming disequilibria. Smaller political psychosocial shifts drive behavior without fitting into a neat umbrella of ideology, even less of grand ideologies like fascism or communism. These conundrums constitute this book's exploration of the paradox, represented by the events triggered by the end of the Cold War in 1991. Abandoning their fierce confrontation, the US and the USSR came to share a benign expectation that they will come together to make the world a better place and at peace with itself. That early bonhomie resulted in significant nuclear weapons and conventional weapons control agreements and a set of Eurasian institutions for managing political transformations, which also had a basis in a shared belief about their political and economic aspects. Several hotspots involving the two superpowers found their political resolution. US as the emergent hyperpower or ultrapower put its own stamp on the current phase of globalization. Yet, this meeting of minds set off events which soon outpaced these expectations, jeopardizing that bonhomie. The salient impact of these early decisions has been a loss of control over the course of events for the US, even when it was the global hegemon. The book traces the course of these fateful events and the entirely unanticipated dialectics between these triggered events and the constant readjustments by others to manage their ramifications. Most global problems can be ascribed to the resulting destabilizing trends and regional instability and state collapse. According to one estimate, half of the world's poor will live in fragile states by 2030. Could the deepening global uncertainties, the economic costs, the human suffering, the environmental change, and ultimately the widespread perplexion about our first principles of state organization be considered as inevitable? In a sense, this exploration touches upon the human condition, upon the pathology of conflict. The book's discussion on the emergent geopolitical writings and the IR theories in the West, having a distinct post Westphalian complexion, with de emphasis on state centrality, traces their mutually reinforcing relationship with the critical Western decisions in managing the post Cold War political transitions. One chapter is devoted to the crippling effect of the Western policy of redesigning of global institutions and the inability of newer multilateral institutions set up by the non Western powers to build a global institutional structure. Another chapter tracks the inability of these political transformations to address the popular aspirations for uplifting empowerment. Today, the cumulative impact of these developments on the unfolding geopolitics of the global disorder makes the man in the street perplexed about their solution. As the pressing global challenges are analyzed, including their future trend lines, a running parallel thread is the elaboration of the nature of the Gandhian praxis, as evident in his steering of the political transformation leading to India's independence in 1947. Relating it to nation building and IR theory, the same benchmarks are engaged which characterize the current methodological conundrums in analyzing political transitions. The Gandhian praxis is about the ennobling and inclusive nature of power transitions, inculcation of inclusive identity and social cohesion, resilience of political institutions, and the quality of governance, which are universally acknowledged as prerequisites for smooth power transitions. But additionally, the Gandhian praxis emphasizes the criticality of political change being steered through the instrumentality of political parties with robust internal democracy and control of ordinary workers over the party leaders and programs. The same parallel is drawn with the political legacy of Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, the iconic Pashtun leader, as Afghanistan goes through endless cycles of state collapse. These interwoven parallel strands of the narrative lead to an alternate approach towards our common global future. The chapter on our options assesses the parallel state of geopolitics, disruptive nature of technology, global institutional incapacity, climate change, conflict, and state fragility, as it surveys the current discourse on it. This discourse is lacking in attention toward the nature of internal configuration of political forces which steer political change. Inadequate decision-making structures complicate adoption and implementation of solutions to our current problems. Analogous challenges from geopolitical fluidity for India are discussed in the context of fragile states in the region, as well as the growing external great power interest, especially that of a rising and muscular China. Whilst India must do all it can to calibrate its statecraft and strengthen its capacities, India's benign, non-disruptive international role can be further strengthened through the inclusion of Mahatma Gandhi's bequest of the theory and practice of management to political change, putting this focus at the heart of global discourse and in the programs of international organizations, including financial. The critical global challenges can be addressed in a substantial manner. Such altered global discourse can even provide the right orientation for mass movements which tend to splinter along narrow agendas or remain unable to provide stable governments. The Gandhian message is one of optimism and faith in the efficacy of global intellectual and material resources.